Welcome to the Science for Sport podcast, where we dive into stories and insights that drive peak performance. Join us as we uncover the secrets behind the science of success. Here's your host, Richard Graves.
Hello and welcome to the Science for Sport podcast with me, Richard Graves. This week's guest, as a player and coach, has a career spanning 36 years in professional sport and counting. As a player, Steve McNamara won every domestic trophy on offer with the Bradford Bulls, before embarking on a coaching career which saw him take England to the World Cup semi-final. He then took Rugby League to the south of France, Perpignan, with the Catalans Dragons, and as head coach there, delivered their first major piece of silverware in the form of the Challenge Cup in 2018, and that was followed by 2 grand final appearances. So, how has the face of professional sport changed over the course of his career? What lessons has he learnt along the way? And what advice does he have now for the next generation of coaches? Well, let's hear from him now.
Unlocking sports science to push the limits of human potential. This is the Science for Sport podcast.
Well, Steve McNamara, it's great to have you on the show and to be able to reflect on a career that across playing and coaching now has spanned, I think, 36 years, I'm right in saying. Can you quite believe it?
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? Signing as a professional when you're 17 years of age and, you don't know what the future is going to hold for you. And, I love my time as a player, really, really love my time as a player. But I was really fortunate in that period to get, some good coaching. And it sort of set me off on that track as well. So hopefully it's just a little pause now from coaching and we get back into it soon.
Well, you say there, a little pause from coaching. Of course, up until recently, you were head coach of the Catalans Dragons and you've enjoyed great success there. We'll get into that a little bit later on in this discussion. But when you think of it, as somebody that came from Hull, you've had a career that's taken you literally all over the world, down under to Australia, New Zealand. You've represented your country as a player and coached them to a World Cup semi-final and won just about every domestic honour as player and coach in the game as well. Would it be fair to say you exceeded your expectations when you started out?
Yeah, it's crazy, isn't it? I think you don't, when you're in the middle of it, you don't sort of think and look back in those terms. But yeah, I think so. I think, growing up in Hull and, like I said, enjoying, playing all sorts of sports as a young age and then eventually settling on Rugby League and going into that. Like I said, I was very fortunate. I had a dad who was, a coach of coaches. He was, he used to take people on the coaching courses. Brian Smith, one of the renowned Australian coaches, was my first professional coach. So I think those first influences actually either really set you off on the right track or set you off on the wrong track. So for myself, fortunately, I was on that right track, and you need a little bit of fortune along the way. You need to be in the right place at the right time at certain stages, but you need to work hard. And I'm really, really proud of what I've done so far in playing and coaching career.
Yeah, there's that phrase, isn't there? You make your own luck, but I often think in sport the key isn't necessarily just making your own luck. It's taking advantage of it and making the most of it when it comes your way.
It is, and I, like I said, I was fortunate. Obviously, your parents are a big influence on you, and I had great parents. And but your very first professional coach, I was 17, and Brian Smith came, and he was incredible. He taught you the A to Z, if you like, of rugby league. There's some coaches there who were really specific and great in certain areas. But I think what Brian did, he revolutionised the game at that stage, particularly in England. And I was fortunate. I was 17. It was my first professional coach, and I thought that was the way everybody did things. You don't know no different, do you? So I think that was set me off in the right direction. And I know it's very, very similar for a lot of other people who've been involved as a player and a coach that have been involved with Brian Smith, and it's put them on the right step going forward.
Well, let's look at the breadth of work that you've accomplished then as a player and a coach, because you start. I think in 1989 was the first time you stepped onto a first-team rugby field. And Rugby League itself was the professional code at that time. Rugby Union hadn't gone professional. So in theory, people today would think that if you're playing Rugby League, you have all the mod cons and assets that go with it. It wasn't quite like that, was it? And over the course of your time as a player and a coach, I guess you've seen tremendous evolution in the sport.
Huge, huge. I mean, at that stage, yeah, you were professional, but you were still working for a living, so you was deemed as professional because you were getting paid. But we worked full time, and so that was interesting. I was an apprentice bricklayer. It was great. I enjoyed working with the lads my age and learning the trade at that young age, and then going off and training on a night time, going playing first team rugby league at a weekend. It was great. I was certainly better at rugby league than I was as a bricklayer. Don't worry about that. I wasn't renowned in terms of that side of things, but it was one of them old sort of things where I'll get a trade behind you in case things don't go quite the way you want them to go. So there was that. I spent a little bit of time working on the fish docks in Hull, which was great there as well. Just getting some work, some manual work there, and as well as being a professional player. But the game progressed, and it progressed quickly. And then I think the big change in the game was the switch from winter rugby league to summer rugby league. And that sort of coincided with my move from Hull FC. I'd been at Hull FC for about 7 seasons. I'd captained the team. It was my hometown club, but the summer season came around, and I got an opportunity to move to the Bradford Bulls as a player. And wow, what an experience that was! And that changed the whole dynamics of the sport. We all went full time. We went from playing in the thick mud, if you like, into the nice fast grounds of summer.
How much do those experiences of Brick Lane, working on the fish stocks, ground you when you look at your career as a whole? Because, of course, in the modern era, players get picked up from clubs, they go into academies, there's a system of progression. And yet, this would all seem foreign to the modern day rugby league player, I think.
Yeah, I feel fortunate in a way. I mean, I am, not envious of the kids now because I think it's a great pathway that they've got. It's incredible if they can focus on it from a young age and get themselves in a position where they can play first team rugby league. But there's things you learn about life as well, isn't there? There's things like I'm an apprentice bricklayer. Yeah, I'm working with kids my own age, but at the same time, when you go out onto your placements, you're working with men. You're a young boy, but you're working with men, different environments, different experiences, understanding what work is really, really like. The fish dock, wow, that's a different experience. Some of the characters there in and around that. And you learn things in life that you wouldn't necessarily learn if you're coming through a scholarship and academy system, working with people the same age all the time. So I'm glad that it went full time. I was so glad that I got an opportunity to be a full time professional. But at the same time, I do feel those early stages of your career, not being solely focused on the sport that you're in, but seeing other life experiences, a really important aspect. And if you can build that into these young players' careers nowadays, I think that would help them as well.
And of course, as a player, you lived through the changing face, shape of a professional rugby league player as well. Certainly at Bradford, players like Leslie Vainicolo came at the turn of the century. Inga the winger played a little bit, and the philosophy of how you play the game essentially changed. What was that like to live through? Because you enter the sport with one philosophy. By the time you came to retiring as a player, that had changed markedly.
Yeah, it's a really good point because wingers back then, wingers scored tries. Wingers were there to finish things and probably not do too much else. Whereas the responsibility on wingers now and the shape and size of those wingers and the way they changed over the period of time. A couple of names you've mentioned there, just giants of men. And the responsibility of carrying the ball early in sets, getting yardage meters now, not just scoring tries. The game has evolved and changed. I was only speaking about this the other day. I was watching some of the old Bradford Bulls stuff, 96, 97, and it was great to watch and great to see. But wow, the game has changed even from when I started to the Bradford Bulls era, but from where that Bradford Bulls era when I was involved as a player to where it is now is remarkably different. And that's why it's so hard to when people say, "Oh, is this player the better player? Is this player a better player?" It's just a completely different era and different shape. But the modern rugby league player now, like they have to be like it's like being a decathlete, but being able to run through a brick wall as well. They have to be so good in so many different areas, and that's every player.
Of course, you were a loose forward as a professional player. Where would you play now if you were the same stature, build, shape?
I'd like to think similar position. I'd like to think so, but you just never know. You've got to find a way. Maybe nowhere. Maybe nowhere, depending on where it's at there now. But no, I think there's a big emphasis on athleticism in all sports now, but actual brains and being smart and being clever, being intelligent, those sorts of things, because of the athletic development of everybody, those aspects can be missed. And I think that's an area there where probably some of us from a few years gone by uh, probably were, I wouldn't say better is the wrong way to say there, but we didn't rely solely on athletic development. It was more about smarts, intelligence, and you could play slow there as well. You know, playing slow was as well as playing quick in certain stages, and there is still an element of that in the game now, but probably not as much as there used to be.
Do you think we've gone through an era when, like, say, it became high intensity for 80 minutes all of the time? Have we come full circle so that some of the qualities that you mentioned there, being able to read a game, slow it down, speed it up, are returning to it now to complement the progression that's been made?
Yeah, potentially. I mean, every rule change that has been made in rugby league over probably the last 20 years has been designed to speed the game up, to make the game quicker, to make the game faster, to give the players less rest, to have more ball in play time. The ball in play time is phenomenal in rugby league now. And that's what the TV audiences want as well. They want that. They want action, and they're certainly getting that. But there'll be a point where there's a breaking point where the players simply can't keep doing that without getting injured. You know, there's lots of games, summer sport, playing in the heat, the game's that fast, that potentially we need to be careful in terms of how far that goes and making sure the balance is right. Otherwise, you actually minimise, you stop big men playing the game. You know, really, really big men and powerful men who play short minutes can gradually get worked out of the game.
What was training and nutrition like? Or was there even an awareness of nutrition when you were playing? Because that's something else that's evolved markedly as well, isn't it?
Yeah, there was, and that's what I said. When I was fortunate at a young age to be involved with Brian Smith, who was I guess in it earlier on, a guy who coached from the A to Z. He also brought in some really basic stuff there around that, and it's interesting because at the time it was probably as good as you could get. You know, that's what everyone was doing at that time, and then the focus changes. You know, as the years roll on, and look at some of the physios and some of the strength and conditions and then the performances, some of the equipment, some of the intelligence, some of the knowledge, you know, all of those things that come together now, what they're providing for the players in the game now is phenomenal. But it was probably just that, you know, it was just that it was a different level at different stages. That was as good as we got back then, and you just accept it, and that's the way to go, and that's the way you go forward. But it's certainly nowhere near the level where it's at that now. That has moved on light years in terms of where the players were at back then to where they are now.
You've mentioned Brian Smith on a number of occasions.
Yeah.
Was he the coach that had the greatest impact on you during your career, and then subsequently what was to follow in your own coaching career?
Yeah, he did because he set me off. Like I said, it's your first impression that counts quite often, and just how thorough he was, his knowledge of the game, all the aspects of the game. He could talk about anything of that. He was a school teacher as well. That was his background, so the way he could present to a group there as well. It was all those types of cues and skills that you learn from people. So I've had some really, really good coaches. I've been fortunate to work with a lot of good coaches as a player, to work with a lot of good coaches as a coach myself, you know, alongside other head coaches, alongside other assistant coaches. But I think that first impression counts so much, and without doubt, he was the biggest influence.
Your first venture into coaching, your first head coaching job was with the Bradford Bulls, of course, in 2006. Given the size of the club at the time, the success that enjoyed arguably the most successful period in a club's history, that strikes me as a baptism of fire, wasn't it?
It was huge. I mean, I finished playing and I went there as an assistant coach to Brian Noble, where I worked with the academy and worked with the first team. So it was a great responsibility. You had the responsibility of head coaching your own little team, but that was sort of on the side, you know, a couple of nights a week and play on the weekends. But you also were full-time assistant coach with the first team. And through that era, I think Bradford Bulls went to 5 consecutive grand finals. And then I took over on the back of going to 5 consecutive grand finals. And yeah, people say that's a tough ask to take on. And it was. Because probably at that stage there, the club were just starting to go into some financial difficulties. I remember I took the job, and within 10 days, Stuart Fielding come knocking on the door and wanted to follow Brian Noble to Wigan. Brian Noble had gone to Wigan, and you imagine me, I'm the first, it's my first job, and you got your star player, your best player, knocking on the door saying he wants to leave, and we ended up with a world record transfer fee. I think it was £440,000, and in reality, I was trying to work a deal where we might get some player exchanges, some money, some player exchange, try to strengthen our squad, whichever way. But in reality, that was never going to happen. The club needed the money, it needed the finances, and that transfer fee at that stage kept us going. Really, in some regards, kept it going on a bit longer than it would have before getting into financial trouble. The silver lining to that story was we had Sam Burgess, a 17-year-old, sat in the wings waiting for his opportunity, and Stuart leaving accelerated Sam's progression.
From a personal perspective, how do you handle this situation? Because we've already touched upon the size of the club in the Bulls, the job. Then you're suddenly confronted by scenarios which mean you're not just focusing on coaching this squad of players, you've got to handle external factors. For an experienced coach, that's a lot to take on your plate. For a rookie head coach, I struggle to get my head around how you handle that.
Yeah, and probably at that stage it was really, really difficult. And there was a couple of things that I learned from that. Where the first thing was, because I was involved with the academy at that stage, progressing the youth was my number one priority. That is what we wanted to do in the idea. A great support staff down there, Matt Robinson, a guy who helped recruit a lot of these players. So in that academy team, we had George Burgess, Tom Burgess, we had Brett Ferris, who was an England international, Elliot Whitehead, John Bateman, Sam Burgess. Like we had a brilliant crew, and they were all coming through. So my focus was on trying to get those people into the team, get them playing and developing Bradford at that stage. But it wasn't long before we then had to sell Sam Burgess to South Sydney. He went across there as well. So and it started to be very, very difficult from that point. So my focus was, obviously we're trying to win games at the first team level, concentrate on that. But I knew that if we could keep this group of young players together, we would have a hell of a team. It wasn't meant to be, and things moved on.
If we move on from the Bulls, you then become England head coach. And I think when, if I'm correct in my train of thought, when you started, that wasn't a full-time role, was it? Which, again, people listening will say, hang on, you're the national head coach and it's not full-time. But that was all part of the progression leading up to the 2013 World Cup, when you changed a lot of the philosophy around that setup.
Yeah, no, it was full-time, Richard. It was. I was Bradford Bulls coach, and that adventure sort of ended, and then I went full-time with England. And the idea was, with England, we needed to make some change at that stage. We needed to really create an identity for the England programme. The England Rugby League is a fantastic organisation and group to be in, but it's no identity. It's not. We ain't got an home ground. It's not Twickenham. It's not Wembley. It's not, we're sort of a little bit nomadic, and even for our training facilities, using other people's grounds. So we created a real identity. We moved all of our training to Loughborough University. We took ourselves away from the M62 corridor. We created a two-team mentality. We tried to make sure the players felt that they were part of two teams, the club team Wigan and England, which hadn't been the case in the past. And we actually went on a really good adventure. We aligned all of our programme from under 16s right through to the top level there. So it was a really, really great project. That was right through to the 2013 World Cup. It was after I decided to go to Australia to work for the Sydney Roosters that it went back part-time. They allowed me to go back part-time, but the England programme was a brilliant part of my learning, my adventure as a coach.
And when we focus on that England role, Steve, for you, with it being a home-hosted World Cup, getting to the semi-finals, was that the pinnacle in getting to the World Cup semi-final itself, or was it the process that you installed along the way?
It was a pinnacle. Well, I say the pinnacle. It was obviously a really sad finish in the semi-final, but the process along the way was the most enjoyable part. I've been fortunate. I was the assistant coach of England, so sometimes when you're the assistant, you can see the difficulties that, and Tony Smith was the coach at the time, that he faced as head coach. So you can see for the first hand the things that you might be able to affect and change. And the problem with the England programme was it wasn't aligned. None of our programmes were aligned. The players didn't feel like they had an identity. We didn't have a Wembley as a home ground. We didn't have a Twickenham. We were nomadic. So we there were some things there that we could do. We moved to Loughborough University. All our training was there. We based ourselves out of there. We learned the programs. We created a two-team mentality. I learnt that from Stuart Pearce, who coached England under 21. So the players really felt they were part of two teams. Yes, the club team, Wigan, St Helens, Leeds, whoever you played for, but England as well. And we just kept constant dialogue. And it was a pleasure to build that program up. And what culminated at Wembley 2013, the World Cup semi-final, in what I still believe was one of the best performances from an England team. But it taught everybody as well that at the highest level of sport, the margins are so fine that you can be so good in a game and you can still get beat at that level.
Yeah, it's the psychological aspect as well, isn't it? I've got Rudyard Kipling's poem If in front of me here in the studio. And there's that line, if you can meet triumph and disaster and treat those two imposters just the same, which sounds great in itself when you're in the heat of battle, when you're leading going into the 80th and final minute and it comes down to literally the last kick of the game and you come up short. As a coach, first of all, how do you handle that in the dressing room afterwards and picking the players back up? And then on a personal level, over the subsequent days, how do you reflect and process that?
Yeah, it was like time stood still. I think there was 20 seconds left on the clock. We played so well. Sean Johnson scores a try. I was coming down the steps at that stage watching, and it was as if the whole stadium stood still. Time stood still. The players were in disbelief. I remember going onto the field. Our players were absolutely distraught with the situation. Australia were on the pitch warming up. They were playing Fiji in the semi-final straight after our game, double header, and their players were even coming across and saying they couldn't believe how it had happened. And I think just at the end of that, you've just got to thank the players for their effort in trying to get themselves in a position to be the best that they possibly could be in that tournament. And I think by the end, when the semi-final was the end, unfortunately for us, we'd got our team performing at such a high level that it was, we couldn't have played too much better on that day with what we had. And that's all you can ask as a coach, that the players have give you everything and they can look each other in the eye and say they've done that. And you have to acknowledge international sport, highest level sport, whatever you're at, the margins, like I said, are so fine. It's a really fine balance. But if, as you were saying there, if only we could have lasted another 20 seconds, you never know what might have happened after that.
And what about for yourself? Because you've spoken about getting the players to the standard that you wanted to be able to perform at that moment when it mattered. Do you look at that with pride now? Are there questions that you ask of yourself as a coach? Could you have done any more? I guess these are all sort of things that come out in the wash afterwards, aren't they?
No, with what we had at that stage, what we could currently do with our group of players, I am 100% satisfied with what we did. I have no regrets whatsoever with that England programme. We did everything we possibly could. I had an incredible group of staff. What was with us? We managed to recruit a group of staff. Now, I'm going to actually go through a couple of names here now. Where Lawrence Stewart was our analyst. Lawrence Stewart is now the sporting director, co-sporting director of Chelsea Football Club. Mark Bitkin, he was our head of performance. Mark Bitkin is now the sporting director of Southampton Football Club. Danny Rubin was our media manager. Danny's the media manager for England cricket now. Like we put together a crew, and there's many more. There's many more people could name in that crew that were excelling in their sport. We provided for that group of players the very best environment we could with the finances we had. We provided them with the very best group of staff to support them, to give them the best we possibly could. And yeah, if you have another 10, 20, 30 million pounds there to spend, of course you can do some different things, but it wasn't about money. We brought that group together. They were clearly one group. And I think that's continued since I left the England programme. I think they've tried to continue down that vein as well. And I have no regrets whatsoever about that period.
Many people might think coaching your country is as good as it can get and there's nowhere to go after that. But you've never been someone that struck me as being someone that was ready to stand still. You've always looked for the next challenge. You spent some time as an assistant coach down under in the NRL and then came back to Super League with the Catalans Dragons, and people were looking at it, well, we know about Rugby League's attempt at expansion. They'd never really achieved much, but at home they played with the Gallic flair, if you like. It was a heck of a challenge to take on, but it was a successful one over eight years, bringing them their first trophy, taking them to the grand final. How does that come around?
I'll tell you how it comes around. Like I was, yeah, the World Cup finished, and I needed something new, something exciting, and I was actually looking at rugby union at the time. I nearly went to Bath Rugby Union Club, and it ended up in the NRL with the Sydney Roosters as an assistant coach. Could combine that job with the head coach of England, and that was interesting in itself because it was the next phase, if you like, of the England program. Because you're in the enemy's territory. You're actually seeing what the enemy are doing to prepare to play against you, and I sort of viewed it in that way and thought this can help me personally. I can help with the Sydney Roosters. It can help the England program, so that was great. Did 3 seasons at the Roosters, went to the New Zealand Warriors. You know, it was a completely different network across there and looking at things differently, which was great. But then this opportunity come to Catalans Dragons. And normally I do a thorough research before I make any sort of decisions. I like lots of information, but I didn't want too much information on this because I knew they weren't in great shape. And I knew if I knew that information, I probably wouldn't take the job, but I wanted to do the job. It always interested me. Trent Robinson, who was a Sydney Roosters coach now, I'd visited him a few times at the Catalan Dragons and thought this intrigues me. So anyhow, the decision was made. Pat McBags came back to the south of France and took over a team what was clearly we were struggling. We ended up in £1 million game. We had to win a game. We were losing that game at half time against Lee to survive in the competition. Again, if we'd have got beaten that game, I don't know what the future would have held, Richard, for Catalans, for French Rugby League, for myself as a coach, but we managed to win that game. And then the progression from there was enormous in terms of taking them from what was labelled as a very inconsistent team to a consistent team that, we made top 4 years running. We won the league leaders. We were points difference off winning the league leaders another year, and the Challenge Cup, the 2 grand finals, everything else that goes with it. So yeah, another really enjoyable part of the journey it's been for me.
Was that another challenge in itself, living in a different country with a different culture, different philosophy to the way you play the game?
Ultimate challenge. The hardest job in rugby league, but the most challenging job, one of the hardest jobs, but one of the best jobs as well. It was an incredible. And I think that, again, you start to learn different things and you open yourselves up. I had to make myself vulnerable. I landed there. It's like landing on Mars. I landed in the end of June. Honestly, it was 40 degrees. It was red hot. I didn't know hardly any of the players. I couldn't speak to most of the players. They were French, but I was there to help them survive. It was my job there to make that club stay in the Super League and then progress. So I was there to help them, but I had to open myself up and tell them, I need your help, boys. I can't do this. Without the support of you as well. And it was actually a really good way of making a connection with people, because how do you make connections? How do you relationships? You generally chat to each other, you talk to each other, you communicate with each other. So if you can't do that freely with somebody, how do you get that trust? How do you get that trust from a player to a coach to a player, that you're there to help each other? And I opened myself up a little bit in terms of that. And the French boys all the boys, everybody was outstanding, but the French boys in particular, the French players, helped me so much settle down into that country.
At what point did you feel that everyone was singing from the same hymn sheet? You'd got that buy-in. Was it the 2018 Challenge Cup final success, or did you feel it before that?
So there was one real turning point for us. So we survived the £1 million game. People don't forget this. The following year, we start the competition off. And I think we've only won 2 games from, I think it's 9 or 10. Before we got to the 9th or 10th game, I think we were 2 from 7. A game got cancelled due to the weather. And the owner Bernard Gouache, he said, I need you to come up to my house up in the mountains, and can you bring your head of performance, Rich Unwicks at the time, and your head physio, Rob Parkinson, can you bring him with you? And I'm thinking, what's happening here? Why are we going up here to see him? We're 2 from 7.
It's not often much good comes from those kind of meetings, Steve.
No. Anyhow, he opens his doors. He's got the barbecue on. He's cooking meat. He's got the wine out. And he says, look, Steve, we recognise everything. The results aren't going quite the way, but we love everything that you're all doing. You and your staff, crack on, get on with it. You've got my support. And I thought, wow, this is great. Anyhow, so then we move on that season. We start winning games. We progress into the semi-final of the Challenge Cup. And it was probably that semi-final of the Challenge Cup we annihilated, and we did, a St Helens team that was unbeatable at that stage. And we were 29-0 up, I think, or 27-0 up at half-time. And it was a phenomenal performance against a team that really shouldn't have got beat. I looked around, I thought, this team's really coming together here now. And we subsequently won that game. And then we went on to win at Wembley, the first ever trophy for the club, which then opened up the following year a chance to play at the Nou Camp, Barcelona, which was another incredible experience for everyone involved.
Against Wigan, wasn't it, as I recall?
Against Wigan. And that was as big as a Chance Cup fan. It actually derailed our season the following year. It was that big an event. For the people of Catalan, it was like, it's the Holy Grail. It's like we're travelling down. It's like when all the buses go down to Wembley, that was it, from Perpignan to Barcelona, the 2-hour drive. And, it was brilliant to see, and such a spectacular for everybody in Catalans, but for Rugby League in general, it put us on the map.
It's a remarkable path that you've walked along your career, as I say, both as a player and then more recently as a coach. We know you've left the Dragons now. So what's next? Are you ready to hang up the boots, or is there more in line for Steve McNamara?
No, not a chance. But obviously, you've got to get the opportunity. That's the one I'm itching, ready to go. I've had a break. I feel good. I feel refreshed. It is hard. Anybody who's been involved in coaching will tell you it's a weekly treadmill. It's so hard. And particularly in France, a foreign language, a foreign culture, everything else, all the travel that we have compared to a different team. I sort of laugh and joke about, like a dog? Every year of our life is 7 of a dog. I think it feels like that when you're the Catalan coach. It's so hard for the players, for the staff, everybody. So that little bit of a break, that little bit of a refresh there, I'm up and running and ready to go again. But obviously, you've got to get an opportunity. It's got to be the right opportunity for yourself as well. So we'll see what the future lies.
And what are the lessons you've taken along the way for those either working in amateur sport, whatever that sport might be, or looking to tread a professional path themselves? What's the advice you'd give? Because as we've touched upon in this conversation, you've experienced the highs, but there's been lows along the way. Yeah,
without doubt, it's the support mechanisms you have around you. It's the assistant coaches you put around you. It's your medical staff, your S&C staff, your administration staff, your recruitment staff, all of those people. Like, this is never a one-man job. The job's way too big if you're going in at head coach level. And through good experiences and bad experiences, and they've not all been good. There've been some poor ones for me there along the way in terms of that. That is the most important. And when you have that settled group around you, when you've got that confidence, that trust as a group, I mentioned a few of those with the England group. It was the same along the way with Bradford, with Catalans. We've had good, and then we've had some years when it's not been so good. That is the biggest difference for me, is that there is so many aspects to a job in terms of being a head coach, of a manager, that you must have people around you who can take on those other responsibilities to make your job as simple as it possibly can be. And for me, that is coaching a rugby league team.
Yeah, certainly good advice for anyone listening along the way. If people have enjoyed this conversation, want to stay across your story and see what's next, where can they find you across social media channels?
Well, that's the rare, because they can't at the minute. That's probably the only thing. That's maybe one of the lessons there. I've never done it. Maybe it's a good thing. Maybe it's a bad thing. I understand that. Maybe I need to start getting into that. Probably LinkedIn is as far as it goes for me. That's, I'm on that and put a couple of posts there. But no, I'll probably start to. I like doing these things now. I think I've had a bit of a time of a rest. A couple of podcasts now, been on Sky Television a little bit, and you start to get yourself around a bit. And don't know, maybe that's advice you could give me, Rich. What do I need to do? I need to get more active on social media and things like that. But we'll be out and about, and hopefully we'll see everybody soon.
We'll see what we can do. I'll pass on what limited knowledge and information I have. I don't think I'm quite the Gen Z content creator just yet, Steve. But listen, it's been great to have you on this week's show and hear your story and what you've learned along the way. And certainly I'll be keeping a keen eye to see what's next on the story, because it's not closed just yet.
Definitely not. Thanks, Rich. I really appreciate your time.
Unlocking sports science to push the limits of human potential. This is the Science for Sport podcast.
Huge thanks to Steve McNamara for taking the time to join us on this week's episode and share his experiences from a long, successful career in coaching at the professional level. And if you want to find out more about different coaching styles and techniques, you can do so by visiting our website, www.scienceforsport.com. If you've particularly enjoyed this episode and the chat with Steve McNamara, then please do feel free to share it with a coach, a colleague, an athlete or a friend. Remember, as I always point out at this juncture, the more downloads we get, the easier it becomes for us to attract top-name athletes or people such as Steve, still at the top of their profession, onto the show. Well, that's just about all for this week's episode. Thanks once again for listening, and I look forward to the next time you join us on the Science for Sport podcast.
Subscribe to the Science for Sport podcast now, wherever you listen to your podcasts. For more insights, resources, and to join the Academy, visit scienceforsport.com and connect with us on social media by searching for @ScienceForSport. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.